Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest edition of the Woke Bros. Of course, I'm your co-host, Big Waz, aka Wazzy Lambre. Nando is out this week with some sickness. You know that man been globetrotting. They giving him all kinds of shit in Spain and Europe and all over the place. So he couldn't be on today. But luckily, man, we got friend of show. He's a columnist at Jacobin magazine. He's the host of the Give Them an Argument podcast. My man, Ben Burgis. Welcome back, brother.
Hey, thanks, man. It's been a while. I'm glad to, buck the trend as an Anglo and take that Britain's job.
I love it. Listen, the reason why I wanted to have you on, Ben, is because I always like your commentary on the left issues that are not so easy to articulate, right? It's easy to be like, yo, we're pro-labor, pro-union. Obviously, the Amazon union should happen. Obviously, Starbucks should happen. Like, there's these issues that it's so obvious that we need to be on the side of. Everybody kind of understands that, but I always appreciate your analysis of tougher issues, like, say, crime, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the issues of crime are something that is associated with people on the left that we would consider part of our cohort, poor people, working people, some of the people on the fringes of society. And there could be sort of a conflict there, right? Crime often happens to our cohort the most, and the people committing these crimes are our cohort the most, right? And I always appreciate your ability to articulate a vision of how we should be thinking about these more difficult issues. Because like I said, that us versus them cheerleader shit, it's so easy. It's not very hard. But these other things are. And last week, had my boy Ethan Strauss up here to talk about the situation with the brother Neely who died in the subway, was killed in the subway. This guy, obviously dealing with mental health issues, his life came to a tragic end. And, I thought this might be one of those New York stories that sort of comes and goes, but this thing seems to have legs. And it seems to be grabbing people's attention in a way that is unique to most stories that we hear. And I have so many feelings about all the things involved, not one of which being how people have tried to shoehorn race into this. And not to say, again, this is America. You can never completely dismiss race as a factor.
Right.
This is America after all. But I think, man, I think to concentrate on the race part of this completely misses the point. Yeah. And I think it's the trap that a lot of people on the left fall for. Just before I start even asking you some more pointed questions, what was your overall feeling about the entire episode and the reactions from, people like AOC, the people that are protesting in the subway, shutting down the subway the other day, obviously the cops? Like, what's your overall feeling about this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess two things. One is just that it's horrifying what happened, that this guy was killed, was murdered, on the subway, and I don't think we should, whatever else we say about it, whatever we say to complicate, I don't think we should let that part go, because it's not, because if you put somebody in a chokehold for that long, then you should know that there's a really good chance that you're going to kill them. Like, that's this has come up enough times before, with the police incidents and all that, like, people should know that, that, and so at best, it's just, maybe the guy who killed him didn't know that, and he was just being completely reckless, and it's manslaughter. But that's a horrifying thing, and it's a horrifying thing that everything that happens in America immediately becomes a culture war issue 2 minutes after it happens. And people have to take sides, and people have to own whoever they think their enemies are, which means that I have seen people, mostly people on the right, who have seemed to kind of justify it, and that I don't think we can have like any tolerance for that at all. You know, that I don't think there's any justifying this, that, you know, you can't, like, somebody who doesn't, unless somebody who's not, from everything I've seen, like, actually laid hands on anybody in this situation, however scary you thought they were being. I mean, like you can't do this, right? That's one thing. But then the other thing is that I think that if you just stop at that, I think you're missing a big part of what's going on here, because there is also an issue about mental illness and poverty, and people not getting the help that they desperately need. I mean, like the fact that you know, this guy is being that, you know, he's been in and out of the system in various ways for a very, very long time. You know, by the time this happens, that you know, he is in that. I'm sure, you know, sometimes, you know, like I don't have any trouble believing that people actually were frightened, you know, in that moment.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of thing that happens. I mean, you know, I never lived in New York, but I lived in New Jersey. I spent a lot of time on New York subways. This is not like it's the kind of thing that happens, right? That's and I think that I think there's this thing that we fall into on the left sometimes. It's really unhelpful, where we sort of say, well, like, the sort of good progressive thing to do is just to, like, not be bothered by any of it. Like, and I don't think that's helpful.
That was the first thing that I wanted to tackle. So I basically live on YouTube, right? It's like, that's what I do to channel surf. And so inevitably I end up consuming a lot of our own friends' work, right? Mm-hmm. And a clip from Majority Report surfaces, and Emmaviglin, somebody who I consider a friend, especially, you know, professionally and in our circles, somebody who I'm a fan of, straight up. Right. Yep. And she was talking about this, and she was like, yo, you know, one time I was on the subway and some dude was having an episode, and, you know, I got elbowed in my grill, like basically got elbowed and hit in the face. And, you know, I had to move, but I was like, it's cool. He's kind of having his episode, and just moved on. And I was like, look, man, I'm glad Emma was able to keep her composure in that instance. But when I heard her saying that, I thought about my own aunt, my mom, rest in peace, people who would take the train every single day going to work, you know, a 58-year-old woman going to her nanny's job. I don't think she should have to be cool with getting hit in the face by a dude who's having an episode on the train. That can't be the solution, that we sort of just be like, no, this is fine and it's cool and let's move on with our day. I'm not trying to come at Emma. This is somebody I got immense love and respect for. But I was like, man, I don't know if I could ask the people in my family, specifically the women in my family, to just be like, it's possible that you might be physically assaulted on the train today, and you should be cool with that.
No, I mean, definitely not. And that's the thing, like, I think where we go wrong a lot of times. And, you know, and I think, you know, I watched that clip that you're talking about, and I saw people arguing about it. And look, Emma's my friend. I think that she, I think I get what she was trying to say in that moment. But yeah, I mean, I think go into the larger subject, you know, like, I think we do this a lot. I mean, another friend of mine in that world, Anna Kasparian, had an incident where she was, you know, she was walking around on the street in LA, and a disturbed homeless guy, like, basically grabbed her and sort of, you know, fully clothed, but sort of like thrust at her, and in this way that I think was really disturbing. And when she talked about it on, I think she mentioned it on her show, or she mentioned it on Twitter, I saw people kind of reacted to this like, oh, look at Karen here, like, you know, is like, you know, scared of, you know.
So, Ben, before
it's not okay, right? Like you can't. you can't expect people to just be okay with this stuff.
This is the problem with some people on the left. And again, I don't want anybody to think I'm coming at Emma. Sure. I love her. She's great. I'm not talking about her right now. I'm talking about some people on the left. They always forget that the purpose of this enterprise is consensus building, coalition building.
Exactly. How
are you going to bring people on one accord with the messaging being get fucked up by homeless people on the street?
Yeah.
How the fuck are people supposed to rally behind that?
No,
that don't make no type of sense, Ben. I'm sorry. What the fuck are you talking about?
No, exactly. Like that's just obviously like not going to happen. And, you know, and I think that there's this thing that, like, I think it comes out in a lot of ways. I think that when people are talking about crime, I'll see people say that any sort of like expression of concern or alarm, you know, about crime rates is like just propaganda. Or they'll point out it's like, oh, it's like still lower than it was. It's still lower than it was in the 90s. It's like, yeah, okay, but if you know, like if like a bunch of people lose their health insurance at the same time, you would be like, yeah, but there's still more people insured now than there were before Obamacare, right? Like you'd still see it as a problem, you know. You'd still, and this is something that I mean, certainly if you look at like any polling, I mean, like the majority of the people that we would need to win over to a left platform to actually build that kind of, you know, coalition that you're talking about, do see this as a big problem. I mean, that there's
it's just like
obvious, you know, that crime is like a big concern for people who live in working class neighborhoods where they're worried about crime, right? That this is, I mean, this is even like,
and this is the thing too, Ben.
Yeah.
We cannot make Anna and Emma the avatars for this issue that we're talking about.
Sure.
Like, yes, you and I can recognize that, like, and this word gets thrown around just disgustingly all the time. But yes, these are fairly privileged people who can be identified as white, who have public voices. Like, they are not the avatars for this issue.
No, I mean the most people who are, you know, who spend the most time about this, like, are not any of those things, right? Like that. This is, and I think the disconnect is often crazy. I mean, like this is, so I always think about, you know, these polls where they'll specifically ask black voters, do you think the police presence in your neighborhood is not enough, too much, or about right? And the too much is always by far the least popular option. And even though the same polls, people will say, you know, cops can be racist and abusive and they want reforms, all this stuff, right? Yeah. But like, bottom line, people who live in high crime neighborhoods are worried about crime, which we should expect. And even when it comes to people you might think of as a little bit more middle class, you know, you're still talking about people who are in what we would think of as the working class, people who we want to win over to our politics. And both those people and people who, you know, who are much poorer, like, okay, so I remember that back in like the fall, there was a point where there was this article by Jacob Silverman in the New Republic that was where it was about like David Sachs, but he threw in this paragraph where he mentioned Anna, he mentioned me, and he mentioned our favorite Spaniard, and he quoted things that the three of us had said along these lines, and described us as people who may have once considered themselves leftists, but now, you know, can't consummate the sight of homeless encampments. And it's like, you can't consummate the sight of homeless encampments? To me, that's a sign of a broken society that's not meeting people's material needs, right? So that's one, right? Just on the, this site should disturb you. It's horrifying that, like, we have these debates where it's like the more progressive option is this like dystopian neoliberal option. Just, just let them sleep in the park, right? They'll be fine. And then two, like, look, realistically, most people with families want to be able to do stuff like take their kids to the park.
Yep.
And, if they see people who, are sleeping in the park, they see people who often are mentally ill, people who, often, have addiction issues, like, that's going to be something that they're going to see as a concern. And if we set this up, so, okay, the right wing view is just like bring the cops in there and like, bust people's heads. And then the progressive view is just stop talking about it. Just
Just
like,
move on with your life.
just stop being
Just deal
bothered
with
with
it.
the situation.
That's
Then
that's
we're
that's
going to lose every time.
that's absurd. And like you said, this is why I love talking to you, Ben. Like, how can you say this is anything but a failure of the state
Yeah.
and their puppet masters who basically influence them, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think about New York, honestly, and I think about unhoused people, and I think about the lack of care that we have for people that
Yeah.
have mental health issues, the first industry that comes to my mind is the real estate industry, who is extremely powerful and influential in New York City. And who, by the way, this is the thing about
Yeah.
real estate that's like a little different from tech in like places like the Bay Area. Like, so not that I think this is true, but
Yeah.
like if you're Meta or Google or whatever, you could say, we're not drafting upon San Francisco, Oakland, the Bay Area itself in order to create our billions.
Mm-hmm.
We're making software. Like, fuck the fact that you get all your students from Berkeley and Stanford and all of that, but they can kind of credibly make the argument that they're not drafting upon the place that they're at in order to be who they are. The
Mm-hmm.
real estate interests in New York, the reason they could charge these exorbitant rents and freaking sell condos for the ridiculous prices that they do, make the absurd profits that they do,
Yeah.
peddle the amount of influence that they do, is only because of New York. That's it. It's not your incredible architecture or you made these great homes or whatever. It's because all of this shit that people associate with what is in New York City. That's why people want to be there. I.e., the people, the shit in New York is what you're drafting upon to make your fucking profits. So, to my mind, like when it's an issue of housing, this
Yeah.
falls directly at their fucking feet. This is their problem. This is their fuck up. And they're the ones who profit from it the most, more than anybody else. That industry that tells the mayor what to fucking do. Super duper
Absolutely.
funded by those folks. Like, so to
Absolutely.
my mind, when I see this shit on the train, I don't see this as a failure of liberals or conservatives or
Yeah.
Democrats or Republicans. It's beyond that shit.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I mean, the sort of basic thing is that, I mean, obviously, um, the this like if somebody is screaming and you're scared that it might go beyond screaming, they're like acting in a way that's disturbing. Obviously, putting them in chokehold is a crazy overreaction. That's not okay. But if our response to this is, oh, you should just just be cool, right? Like you don't have to like just don't be bothered by stuff like this. One, you're kind of accepting a really grotesque reality that like everything that certainly everything that I care about as a socialist. I mean that like I want a society where everybody's material needs are met, everybody's treated equally, and if somebody doesn't have the housing they need, if somebody doesn't have the mental health services that they need, they don't have if they have addictions, they're not in the treatment they need, right? That's a profound failure of that society. That's an injustice. And I don't want people to get used to it or be okay with it. And so that's one thing. But then the other thing is just practically, look, you're never gonna win that argument. Like if you're just trying to like shame people within a certain kind of left media sphere or left Twitter into like towing the line because they don't want to get yelled at, like, okay, that might work. But if you're trying to appeal to all those tens of millions of people that we would need to appeal to like actually have a chance of winning over a majority and taking power and doing the things that we want to do, politically. And I'm not talking about, like, as you say, it's bigger than Democrats or Republicans. I'm not talking about like which like presidential candidate gets 50% plus one of the vote. I'm talking about fundamentally realigning American politics in the way that we're going to need to if we want to even get health care, never mind any of the more radical things that you and I want. So I think that if you're going to win that kind of overwhelming majority, like you're just not going to do it that way. Like you're never going to get most working class people to just be fine. No, it's cool. You're like your sister had like a really disturbing interaction with with like a mentally ill guy on the subway. Just tell her to stop whining about it, right? I mean, like that's not going to be an effective response ever, right? Like what we need to do is to talk about how the things that we want would lead to a society where this stuff didn't happen.
But here's the thing. Here's what I think the conflict arises, right? Yeah. I don't know if you saw this story. This is months ago. And it was just a caricature of the left. And this lady's walking her dog in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Some dude comes along, attacks the dog, murders the fucking dog.
Yeah.
They have some neighborhood watch kind of thing, and leftists or purported leftists show up and say basically the guy is fine. Who cares? Like you should basically get over the fact that a dude attacked you and killed your fucking dog on the street, right? Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah, no, I saw that that there were people like in the like neighborhood Facebook group or whatever were like trying to identify the persons they could get them, and then there are people who like in the responses who want to talk about like 400 years of racism and like
absurdity,
the criminal justice system.
And I mean, like, Ben, it's that can't be what the left. That's not the left. No, that is some lunatic fringe. That to me, that's the storm front of the left. I'm sorry. You are insane. So this is my thing. And people could say that fringe element could call me callous or whatever. I think there are people who fell through the cracks, unfortunately, in society. And because they fell through the cracks, they have a propensity to fuck up life for people who aren't the ruling class, who aren't decision makers, who are just working and living in the society. They have the chance to really wreck their lives, crack them, if you will. I'm sorry, like the people that fell through the cracks, I hate that it happened for them, but they can't be out here killing the dogs of our people. I'm sorry. You can call me some jackbooted thug, Gestapo, whatever. I don't give a fuck. Those people have to be dealt with. I think we need to create a system by which in the future, more and more people are being saved from falling through the cracks. That's what we need to be working on. But in the meantime, we cannot wish away these cracks. They exist. We have to live in a society. We have to deal with them. And if we're going to build coalition, it's not going to be by pretending that the dude that attacked this woman in Park fucking Slope and killed her fucking dog in cold blood is completely fine. We can't tell people that we're cool with that because that's going to come up. When you say, yo, man, this is what the movement's about. All right, what do you guys think about that shit that happened over there where the chick's dog got murdered and some people thought that was cool? You one of those people? Fuck no. Never will be.
I think that's very well said. We want a society where fewer and fewer people fall through the cracks, but you can't will away the existence of the cracks right now. I think that's exactly right. I also think it's like, look, nobody's really consistent about this because you can't be. Like, you just can't like live the world and be consistent about it. I mean, everybody wants people to be punished for some things, like I think oftentimes like people will sort of carve out some weird exception in their head for like more sexual crimes or for, police violence, right? They want like cops who brutalize people
Yeah, to
hear.
hang, yeah.
Yeah. And hey, so do I, but like, that's come on, like what's the standard here? Like you have to, so if somebody is, if somebody's just engaged in day-to-day violence that like destroys the lives of working class people, I mean, like that can't, we can't be indifferent to that either. I mean, I think it's like there are people who will say like, oh, I'm like a, prison abolitionist. I don't think anybody should ever go to prison, who are like,
Yeah, no.
to me,
We
that's,
ain't there yet.
no, that's like being like, I mean, at best, my attitude towards that is like somebody who's like a, Amish person who's not really willing to fight Hitler in World War II. I can sort of admire it, but like I'm not on the same page with you, right? And I think that that what we do need to talk about is, look, people, obviously, there are people who should be on the streets. In some cases, that does mean prison. In some cases, that means mental health care, which might not be voluntary. And we could also talk about how the rules are set for that, because I think there are real problems there. And also, by the way, I mean, I think that since it is a factor, in a lot of the problem that we're talking about, I mean, not necessarily the case we started talking about, I don't know, but like is a problem in a lot of other cases. Also, addiction, it's a lot of people don't want to hear this, but it's like, if you've ever known an addict, the number of people who are addicts who will voluntarily seek help is very low, right? Like that's not going to, you need a system that pushes people into treatment. And, but the long-term thing that I want to focus on too is like, okay, look, we shouldn't be like, if we're going to be the crazy people who are like, oh, you're, perpetuating 400 years of injustice.
400 years of slavery.
If you want to,
this nigga killed a dog. I'm like, what the
exactly. Right. You don't want to be those people. But like, also, look, here's what I think we can say, which is that if we have a more reasonable society, we can have our cake and eat it too here. Can we like do without, incarceration? Totally, no, of course not. But like, there are plenty of places in the world right now, that really exist that have way more lenient criminal justice systems than the U.S. does, and also way less violent crime.
Of course,
because they're, they don't have the crazy combination of wealth and poverty that the U.S. does. I mean, that there's if you just start people at home want to like disturb themselves for a couple minutes, like just start Googling like murder rate by country, and you'll be amazed like when we have these conversations about like, oh, okay, it got a little bit higher, but then it went back and it's still way lower than the 90s or whatever. Like the rate of violent crime in the U.S. has always been crazy, and that's the reason the rate of violent crime in the U.S. has always been crazy is that we live in a really unequal society where a lot of people are not being taken care of in a lot of ways they need to. And, if you look at, places like, the example I always use, think about like Norway, like every once in a while, there'll be something where like an American journalist will go to Norway, they'll like look inside a prison and be like, oh my God, this looks like a dorm room. And like, even like Anders Breivik, right, the mass shooter, will eventually get out of prison because, there's only a certain number of years you can sentence people to prison for. So that's like a much more humane criminal justice system than the U.S., but like also it's a way, way safer country. And the way that you can have both is if you have a big welfare state and strong unions and you create a more equal society. And I know there are people who want to say that it's kind of like Norwegian genetic magic or something, but it's really not.
Oh my God, get the fuck out of here, man. It's so stupid. It's just like if you lose a job, you will not, your life will not fall into desolation.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Exactly.
It's very simple. You make it so that nobody will ever really truly fall on hard and desperate times.
Exactly.
there will be a job for you. And that job will be enough that you can have an apartment. It's really that fucking simple. That's
Exactly.
it. That's it.
And if you need to go to the doctor, that
Yes, it's fine.
you'll be able to do that.
You
It's like
can get your medicine if you need it.
yeah, most developed countries, Breaking Bad would have been a very short and very boring story.
Yeah, healthcare wouldn't have been an issue. His cancer treatment would have been straight. Yeah, it's crazy. It's just crazy because I happen to have a few friends. One, I work for a Swedish company, and two, I have a lot of Swedish friends in LA. Like a few, I shouldn't say a lot. And when you just talk to them, it's just like the things that they take for granted. It's like, no, they love it in the US because they're doing their thing, right? Like, so they're able to, if you're able to support yourself in the
Sure.
US, it's great.
Sure, of course.
And they're doing their thing, but they're just like, nah, we don't got none of this shit in Sweden. Like, nah, we don't. You don't got crazy medical bills, and if you decided you wanted to be a lawyer, or if whatever. Like, nah, we don't just charge people for everything.
No, no. I mean, actually, there's a book from a few years ago by Aru Partanen. So she's a Finnish journalist who married an American guy, I think, and moved to the U.S. And it's called The Nordic Way of Everything. And she's not like a leftist or socialist or anything, really, right? I mean, she's just like a normal Finnish person, and she talks about just being shocked when she got to the United States by seeing what she thought of as like pre-modern relationships of dependency between workers and bosses, between like adult parents and children, that you'd have to like, because like, oh, you need your mom and dad to like pay for college,
Mm-hmm.
between, husbands and wives, because people, like don't leave bad marriages in this ridiculous country sometimes because they can't like lose their health insurance, that
Yep.
they,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all just like forward to her experience. And again, the thing I'd emphasize is, there are, there are a lot of people who want to say that that's about anything but what it's obviously about, right? That like, like they'll say, oh, well, those are like really different countries. You're like, okay, but like, what specifically is like the difference that matters here? I remember Nathan Robinson, I think it might be in his new book, has a line where he calls he's like, it's like you might as well say the U.S. can't have these things because we don't have fjords, right? I mean, that would make about as much sense as any of the rest of this, that like, no, it's not like, oh, it's a smaller country. It's like, what? Okay, but like somehow we managed to like arrange like Medicare for old people throughout the whole country, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We couldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's it's all silly. It's not like anybody who wants to tell themselves that it's like, oh, that it's just like that they just have such a it's just like that there's something just innately nicer about Nordic cultures. I would just say, well, take a look at their entire history up until the 20th century, and you might change, or just like watch the Northman, right? From last year, or whatever. Like they're not like innately nicer people. It's just that they managed to get these things because strong labor unions, socialist political parties, they actually managed to like.
And you know what? I would be willing to listen to arguments of, well, it's like the homogenous nature of the ethnic makeup of the society makes it so that it's hard to demonize an other,
Sure.
right? Where it's hard to be like, man, those particular kinds of Swedes don't deserve health care. Like, it's hard to make that argument when everyone is the same. I'm persuaded by that. Like, the powers that be can't, sort of propagandize the people into thinking that certain kinds of Swedes don't deserve healthcare or free school or whatever, when everybody's just Swedish in a certain type of way. And I realize how facile that is, but I don't discount the role that our racial history
Sure.
plays, getting people to understand the importance of implementing a different way of doing things. I'm sympathetic to that,
No,
to
I
that
think, but
concept.
that's a way that, like, you know, because when people say, "Oh, that's different because that society is totally homogenous," or whatever, it's like, okay, sometimes a lot of the stuff's a little exaggerated, but whatever. There's some truth to that. Like, okay, but I think there are two different ways of taking that. One is that, like, somehow that means that, like, it would work or something, you know, and then the other one is what you're saying, which is that makes it easier for people to politically, to, like, stop it from happening in the first place. And yeah, that's true, right? Like, it makes it easier to stop it, but, like, also, like, you know, that's not a reason to, you know, that's not a reason not to push for that stuff. That's a reason
Yeah.
why it's that's a reason why we haven't won yet, and, you know, that's a reason to,
Yeah,
like, you
it's
know,
a reason why we haven't. It's not a reason to
yeah,
quit.
yeah,
No, absolutely not. It sort of explains why we haven't gotten there
yeah,
yet, but it's definitely not like, oh yeah, there's no point because racism. It's just stupid.
yeah, yeah.
I think bigger problems have been solved. For instance, slavery. I know it took like
Uh,
millions upon millions of deaths, but we
but,
managed to end
yeah,
slavery.
but we did it, and, like, and even, like,
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
even, like, more recently, like, I mean, Jim Crow. I mean, that's
Right.
I read, so Adolph Reed has a book came out like a year ago, called The South, about growing up in Louisiana, you know, and kind of the 9 years of Jim Crow and what that's like and all that. And I think that's, like, a lot of his point in that book is that, like, this is a lot of people are sort of very invested in this narrative that, oh, basically nothing has changed. It's like, no, a lot's changed. Like, that's like we essentially had a successful revolution in this country, like, at a time when, like, you know, my parents were alive, right? Like, that's
Yep.
that, like, that recently. That should be a good indication that we could fucking do it again. I mean, that there's no, like, things, like, all kinds of things seem like they're just going to last forever, but, you know, they just don't.
Man, Ben, thank you for coming on with us today. Please tell the people where they can find you and your incredible work, my brother.
Thanks, man. So yeah, right, for Jacobin, sometimes the Daily Beast. There's and have a Substack called Philosophy for the People. That's benburgess.substack.com, and the show is Give Them an Argument, and that's every Monday night at 8 Eastern on YouTube.
My man, Ben, thanks for being on. Make sure you guys subscribe to the Count the Dings Patreon, patreon.com/Count the Dings. That's how we're able to pump out this amazing content for you guys. We'll see you guys next week. Peace out.